As we begin today, I would first like to acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. The University of Waterloo is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. So as we get started, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping points. After the presentation, we're going to open the floor to any questions that you may have. When we invite your questions, you have the option of raising your hand and we'll unmute your mic. Or if you prefer not to speak, there's a question and answer forum that you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen that you can type in your question and we'll bring those up with our presenter. As well, I want to let you know that we're going to be sending out a survey after the event series completes next week. And we'd really love to hear from you about the kind of programming that you would like to see from us. Is there something specific that you would like to see more of? And how can we help you make the very most of this time? So let's get right to it. I'd like to introduce Danielle Ryan, who's a graduate of the University of Waterloo. She graduated with her BES in 2014. She is a 200-hour registered yoga teacher and mindset coach, and she works and lives in wonderful Muskoka, Ontario. Danielle spent the first few years after graduation in the corporate world before she switched gears to pursue her heart's desire as an entrepreneur. She owns and operates Lifestyle by Design Studio, Muskoka's very first fully mobile yoga studio, where she curates private yoga classes, guided meditations, and coaching services for people both in person and her online membership platform, the Soul Society. Danielle, we're so happy to have you here with us today to help us out in this area that so many are struggling with at this time, how to control our perception and experience and use it as fuel to spark our creativity. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Patricia. Welcome, everyone. As you can see, and as Patricia said, I'm going to be talking today about how we can stay productive, how we can unlock our creativity. I think that this time that we're living in right now is a very unique circumstance, and working conditions for many of you watching have likely shifted over the past few months. And I would love to start if you are willing to share in the chat where you're watching from. I always kind of like to survey the audience and see where everyone is at. As Pat mentioned, I am in Muskoka, so it's a rainy day here, but maybe someone else somewhere has sunny weather to brighten their day. Waterloo, okay, awesome. So as I was mentioning, I transitioned to working from home about 2 years ago, and so I thought that I could share a little bit of my experience through that and hopes of helping you ease that transition. So as it was already mentioned, I graduated from Waterloo in 2014 with my bachelor's in international development. And from there, I started as an administrative assistant with a local municipality in hopes of sort of moving into a more environmental role. But when things didn't really pan out the way I had intended, I was sort of feeling really stuck. And so I decided to launch a podcast at that time, which we just celebrated our 3-year anniversary 2 days ago. So that's very exciting. And essentially, it was just a creative outlet for me to be able to help other millennials sort of navigate this journey through adulthood by sharing my own struggles and my own advice in terms of how I sort of overcame some of the challenges I was facing. And so starting that podcast really opened my mind to this whole other world that I didn't even know existed. And in 2018, I sort of decided a little bit on a whim, I guess, to quit my 9-to-5 job, despite maybe some questionable feedback from my coworkers and my peers and my parents. What about the pension? But I now consider myself to be a doer of many things, and that kind of looks like this, I guess. So I run my yoga studio. I'm also a life coach. I host wellness retreats. I do public speaking. And then when I'm not doing my business stuff, I'm also a volunteer firefighter. So I just tossed in some fun photos of that. Basically, my approach to life is to say yes to whatever comes my way as long as it seems interesting and see where that takes me. So here we are. So good afternoon, everyone. If you don't have a pen and paper handy, I would recommend that you grab one. I do like to try and make my presentations a little bit interactive, just so that there are some tangible things that you can take away and implement into your day. So I see we have people in Kitchener, Smithville. That's awesome. More Waterloo, lots of Waterloo, Kitchener. So that's awesome. So I don't think anything in this presentation is necessarily going to be like groundbreaking new information for those of you watching, but I do hope that this serves as a helpful reminder for you to maybe address some of the things that you've perhaps been neglecting in this weird time that we're living in. And more importantly, I hope that it serves as a spark of motivation to help you get out there and do the thing, whatever your thing is that you want to do. So let's go ahead and let's hop right into it. When we think about productivity, I think we think about it in a really traditional sense. So we think about different time management techniques, or perhaps how to get motivated, or how to work faster and get more done in less time. But before we really get into that idea, I want you to sort of think about this climate that we're living in and the unique opportunity that it presents to you, because we now have more time than ever since we can't really go anywhere. And so I want you to think about using that as an opportunity to slow down. So rather than focusing on faster, 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 let's think about productivity in its truest form. And so to me, productivity in its truest form is being able to create in the most efficient way possible, not necessarily in the fastest way possible. So prioritizing efficiency over speed, if that makes sense. And of course, no great presentation is complete without a cheesy quote. So here's my cheesy quote for the day. How we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And I honestly think that this quote is just a great reminder that every day our actions that we take are weaving the fabric of our entire lives. And so every thread and every action that we take from day to day is equally as important in sort of creating this life that we want in the grand scheme of things. And so on that note, let's go ahead and let's get right into it. I want you to think about what it is you want. When you think about the greater picture of your life, this fabric that you are weaving, what is it that you want? And this is step number one when it comes to improving your productivity, when it comes to being able to tap into that creativity. It really comes down to asking yourself this question. And if we can start here, maybe for you, it looks like, I just want to be able to get my work done in the day. You know, I find it really hard to work from home, and my goal is to get all my work done. Maybe you see this as an opportunity to try a hobby that you've been wanting to do. I know making sourdough bread seems to be a very popular activity these days. So whatever it is, I want you to just take a moment here and ask yourself. And if you have a pen and paper handy, you can feel free to sort of jot down any ideas that come to mind, because that's going to come in helpful as we continue to move through here. Because once we sort of have this list of maybe 5 things we want to do, we need to think about focus, because again, productivity is about being efficient, and we can't be efficient if we're trying to do 5 things at once. So I want you to write down your desire, but only pick one thing. Because in order to improve productivity, in order to improve creativity, we need focus. And so once you have your one thing, we can sort of break it down a little bit further. So we need to understand the intention, because it's all good and great for us to say, I want to learn how to bake sourdough bread. But if I don't have the reason as to why I want to learn how to do that thing, it's likely not going to happen. So I want you to ask yourself, whatever your thing is, why is it that you want to do it? And again, coming back to the work example, maybe it's because your boss told you you had to do it. That's as good a reason as any to want to get the thing done. If you're someone who runs a business, perhaps it's a revenue generating activity, so you need to do it in order to bring in that money. Whatever it is, try to come up with at least 3 reasons, and those 3 reasons need to elicit some sort of emotional response. And so when I think about this, I often use the example of being hungry, because when we're hungry and we get that feeling of like, oh my God, I need to eat something, we don't often procrastinate going and eating because we want to get rid of that emotion. So this can work as well for trying to cultivate positive emotions, and trying to get rid of emotions we don't want to feel. So you can use like, I don't want to feel XYZ as your source of motivation. That's totally okay. And then whatever your 3 reasons, maybe you have more than that, that's fine too. I want you to write them down. And so this is an exercise I do with all of my one-on-one coaching clients, is I actually get them to get like really colorful sticky notes and plaster them all over the wall of sort of like the emotions they're trying to bring into their life, the things they want to experience. Because when we put things down on paper, that actually triggers something in our brain that encourages us to see it differently and see it as being possible for us. So if I can physically see on the sheet of paper that I want to feel this way, and this way, there's something in my brain that's going to make me more inclined to actually get up and go do something about it. And so I'm not saying you have to go and plaster your wall with all these notes, but if you simply just write it down on a piece of paper, I promise you that's going to help. What we can see, we are more likely to do, and that is just the simple truth. So on that note, I want you to stop waiting. And you might be looking at this and rolling your eyes and like, well, if I stop waiting, then I start doing, like, rocket science, right? That's not exactly what I'm saying. So what I'm saying here is that you need to stop waiting for the perfect conditions. We often are our own biggest barrier in that we want it to be the perfect time, the perfect place, have all the perfect tools, skills. And obviously, given the current climate that we're living in, that's never going to happen. And so action here is the key, and that is what you want to see. Because once we start to take action, it's going to fuel this positive feedback loop. And so that's what I'm kind of demonstrating here on this slide. Simply taking the first small action, it doesn't have to be actually going forth and doing the whole thing. Picking one little component of that you can start to take action towards is going to lead to this loop of receiving the benefit of taking that action, which will further encourage more action. So doing leads to receiving, leads to more doing, and so on and so on and so on, fueling this positive feedback loop. Hopefully that makes sense. So now you might be watching, that's great. Okay, I need to take action. Well, obviously I'm on this webinar because I don't know how to do that. Maybe that is, maybe that's not why you're here. Either way, how do we actually do this? There's a few different ways. So what I'm going to share with you is things that I've done in my own experience have worked for me. Maybe they'll work for you. I hope that they do. Let's get into it. So how can we convert it into meaningful action? Well, there are 3 key tips that I have. First of all, number 1, have a plan. And so again, coming back to your one thing, what is the one thing, the one focus that we've chosen for the purpose of this exercise that you want to take action on? From there, you need to be honest with yourself and break it down into what is every single task, and please try and get as specific as possible here, that I need to complete in order to make it happen. What tools do I need? Who do I need to talk to? What resources or skills do I need to acquire? And really have that step-by-step plan of how you're going to make it happen. Because in my experience, when we don't have a strategy and we just say like, oh, I want to learn how to do this thing, we end up sitting down at our computer, spending 3 hours on Amazon, reading reviews for, I don't know, the latest air fryer maybe, and then realizing it's 4 o'clock and the day's over and it's time to go back to my regular life because my workday is done. So you want to avoid that. Maybe that was something I did recently, maybe not. I want you to just be honest with yourself and ask, what do I absolutely need to get done in order to accomplish whatever it was I set out to do in step number 1? From there, if it helps, depending on what your goal is, this may or may not be applicable, but you should make a schedule. And so in my experience, especially with working from home, it's very important to use the schedule in order to hold yourself accountable. So I use a technique called time blocking. You can do this I use Google Calendars, but you could do it in iCal, in Outlook, in your regular day planner if you're old school and do it by hand. And basically all you're going to do is tell yourself at this hour, so from 11 till 12, I am going to check my emails. And you're sort of breaking the tasks down, the plan that you made, and putting it into your calendar step by step so that you can hold yourself accountable to like, oh, it's 1 o'clock. It's time for me to go do this research that I said I had to do. Because even if you know what it is you want to do, unless you tell yourself when it is you're going to do it, it's very easy to go back to that mentality of when the conditions are perfect, when I have X, when I have Y, then I'll take the action. Someday is always coming, but then it never shows up. So unless you tell yourself that today is someday, it's just not going to work. So another tool that I've been using recently, just in the last month or so, with everyone being working from home, is I've been opening my Zoom room for people in my community to hop in, and we do like co-working sessions virtually. And I find that to be a very effective way to hold each other accountable as well. Like we just hop on, some people have video on, some people have it off. All of our mics are muted and we just sort of like hang out and share in the chat what we're working on and then work together virtually. So that could be a good option for you as well if you're looking for that accountability. But lastly, and most importantly, my third tip is to audit regularly. And this is where you really have to be honest with yourself. And it's not really about being hard on yourself for not working 24/7 and It's really about recognizing when you need to sort of pull the reins in on yourself and be like, okay, hey, I put in a 12-hour workday yesterday, but was I really working for 12 hours? Or did I spend 3 hours organizing my email inbox? Tomorrow can always be more productive than today. So remember to not be too hard on yourself and to just sort of step up and self-regulate as needed. So, of course, when all of that fails and you're still feeling like you're staring at the wall and you don't know what to do, why not try to just have a little fun? Honestly, some of the best and most creative ideas I have come when I am being the least productive. And so I think that if you are someone who needs to actually schedule this in, like at 12 o'clock, I'm going to give myself 20 minutes to go play solitaire. Feel free to do it. But I prefer to just use this as when I'm having a moment where my brain just doesn't seem to be working and I can't figure something out, I will just open like scribble.io and play Pictionary for 5 minutes with strangers on the internet. But basically, there are many studies that tout the benefits of creativity in the workplace. And I think that just because you're working from home, it doesn't really have to change that. So if you can find some sort of activity to break things up and sort of get those creative juices flowing, then I'm all for encouraging that to happen. So just remember that this is a really weird, unfamiliar time that we're living in. We are all experiencing it together, and it's okay to not know what you're doing all the time. I still don't know what I'm doing half the time. So if this has helped you to ease that overwhelm even just a little bit, then I'm grateful for that. And I would love to connect with you all outside of this. So as I mentioned, I have hosted my podcast for just over 3 years now. So I've listed a few episodes here that offer similar content to this presentation if you did find it helpful. Most episodes are under 15 minutes long, so they're very easy to digest on the go. So if you want to check those out, you're more than welcome. There are over 140 episodes. So if you are not interested in this topic, but you do want some sort of advice, I am certain that I've probably done an episode on it before, so you can feel free to search that. And then, of course, I would also love to connect with you online. So you can catch me on Instagram at Lifestyle by Design Studio, Facebook by the same name, or my podcast is available on my website, but you can also find it just by searching any major podcast platform. So Apple, Google Play, Spotify, it's everywhere. So that's pretty much it. I look forward to answering your questions. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast, but yeah, I hope that this was helpful.
Thank you, Danielle, for those great tips. I think the one thing we can all agree on is that that people are experiencing this seclusion and isolation in unique ways for everybody. But what's interesting is that most people can connect and relate to the different ups and downs that folks are going through from week to week. So those are some really great tips for how to manage that. We have a couple of questions here that I'd like to ask you if you're willing to stick around and answer those for us.
Absolutely.
So in your talk, you take a very intentional approach to a very specific achievement. Does this apply, like, can this kind of thinking apply to all goals, whether they're short-term goals or long-term goals?
That's a good question. I think that essentially, yes. So this structure is one that I use for most of the goals that I set in both my personal and professional life. But I think that when we're thinking of longer term goals, we sort of want to think of it as a series of shorter term goals, sorry, compiled together. So you would never have a long-term goal that isn't multifaceted. You're not just one day I'm going to own a business and that's it. In order to get to that road of opening the business, there are multiple other smaller tasks or goals, I guess you could say, that need to be completed along the way. And so if we can sort of start there with the larger picture of what it is we're trying to achieve, it makes it a lot less overwhelming to then take that and then break it down into its separate components, rather than just thinking like, oh, I want to start a business, but not knowing where to start. If we're able to use this technique by thinking like, okay, what are the 5 smaller components of that I'll need to achieve? And then what tasks need to be taken to make that happen? That's a more effective way, I would say, of applying that to both.
That's awesome. Thank you. So talk to me a little bit about how you use this approach in your life. Have you used it when you were building and creating Lifestyle by Design? Do you have some examples that you can share with us?
Yeah, so like I think I mentioned this. So I was working in my 9 to 5 job and I had sort of reached this point where I was feeling like something needs to change. I wasn't exactly sure what it was. But I knew that I wanted out. And so for me, honestly, entrepreneurship had never even been a thought in my mind. I remember when I was in university, I had friends in the startup community that told me, oh, you should start a business. And I kind of laughed at them and was like, ha, I would never do that. That's just silly. But here we are. So essentially, it sort of came to this idea of, okay, so my goal is to find a way to get out of this 9 to 5 career. And so entrepreneurship sort of seemed like the path that was going to make sense. And so then from there, it was really breaking it down into what skills do I have? What am I interested in? And what do people actually pay for? So obviously I did a lot of reading in that time and I have a book. I don't know, oh, it's right here. So this book, The $100 Startup by Chris Guillebeau, if anyone is interested in entrepreneurship, starting a side hustle, 10 out of 10 would recommend. Anyway, in that book, he talks about this idea of convergence. And so it's essentially what skills you have, what are you interested in, what do people want to pay you for? I really like eating pizza, but no one's going to pay me to do that. So obviously that's not a very good business idea.
That's a shame.
Yeah, I know, right? So realistically, it came down to setting the goals of like, okay, if my goal is to leave my 9 to 5 job, what skills am I going to have to acquire? I decided to bootstrap my business. So what money do I need to save to make this possible? What supplies do I need? What's my marketing plan? And then from there, I kind of did the bare minimum. I got an accountant. We did like a service exchange. I gave her free yoga for financial advice, and then gathered all the tools I needed to start that mobile yoga studio. So it really came down to, again, figuring out what the bigger picture was and then what all those smaller tasks were that I was going to need to take in order to make it happen. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense. I've got a question from one of our listeners who's asked if you have any suggestions for people that are having trouble being accountable to their schedule. You mentioned having an online office to work at the same time as colleagues, but do you have any other suggestions?
Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to read the question as well. Can you repeat it?
Sure. Do you have any suggestions for people that are having trouble being accountable to their schedule?
Okay.
I think lots of us that can relate to that today or this month.
Absolutely. So typically what I'll do, usually I like to do it on Sunday nights, but you can do it Monday morning or periodically throughout the week, is sort of create like a brain dump list of everything that I need to get done for the week and then pick 3 priorities for the next day. So that way I'm not overwhelmed. I feel like what a lot of us tend to do is have this like mile-long to-do list and we get so overwhelmed that we don't even know really where to begin. So if you can pick like what are the top 3 to 5 things I can do that are actually necessary for me to get done in this time, that can really help to sort of fuel that sense of accomplishment of like, hey, I was able to get these 3 things done. And then next thing you know, you'll actually find yourself getting 5 things done or 7 things done because you've sort of picked those 3 tasks, moved them out of the way, and then sort of like motivated yourself to continue. But if that's not really effective and you can't really find the source of motivation to even get started, then I would recommend perhaps reaching out to colleagues or finding some sort of external accountability system. Even if it's just having a friend text you and be like, hey, how's your to-do list coming today?
Right.
That can be an effective way because then you're like, now I actually have to sit down and do it because someone else knows about it.
Yeah. Are you a list person?
100%. Like,
Yeah.
I would turn my camera around, but my whole wall is just covered in sticky notes. So
That's awesome. Okay, hold on. We have another one here. How did podcasting fit into your major goal? Do you have a podcast on your thoughts, your planning, your wins, your losses as it came to podcasting?
awesome. So I actually didn't start the podcast with any sort of long-term goal in mind. A friend and I had started a podcast a few years prior just as like something fun to do, but she ended up moving away and it kind of sort of fizzled out. And so I was familiar with the platform of podcasting, but I wasn't really like, I didn't really have any reason to continue it on my own until again, I was in this position where I just felt so stuck in where I was at professionally that I wanted some sort of creative outlet to be able to express myself in a new way. And so I thought if I could share that experience of trying to navigate like who I was becoming, and if people could benefit from that, then that would be a great opportunity. And so that's kind of how the podcast came to fruition. And from there, I just started polling the audience, seeing what kind of struggles they were dealing with, what they wanted help with, and using that as fuel for content in terms of like being able to continuously produce. But sorry, was there a second part to that question?
Sure, there's actually a couple more parts. I was trying to give it to you in chunks. How has your perspective on podcasting changed now that you're over 100 episodes in from when you first started?
Honestly, not very much. I actually started my podcast in the front seat of my car at my 9 to 5 job. I would bring my laptop with like my Apple headphones and just record it from the front seat. I made a post about this on Instagram the other day. If you go back to one of the very first episodes, you can actually hear me apologize for the sound of the rain on the windshield. So luckily things have evolved a little bit. I have like an actual microphone now, but I think that podcasting is definitely one of the most digestible mediums because people can listen to a podcast essentially anywhere. It's not like a YouTube video or Instagram where they actually have to sit and read or watch whatever it is you're doing. So personally, I sort of chose it as a way to get my message out to the most amount of people in the easiest and lowest cost way, I guess. Yeah, I definitely love podcasting. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased after producing 140 episodes, but I love it.
That's awesome. Seems like it's a little bit of a virtual journal almost.
Exactly. And it's really been interesting even now to go back and listen to some of the earlier episodes and just for me to see how much I've grown and how much things have changed in that time, even my perception of certain things.
Yeah. So can you tell us, do you use your degree in your business and how did you figure out that people would pay? You talked a little bit, you touched briefly on how you figured out what you had that people would pay for. Mm-hmm. So talk to me a little bit about how you used your degree and then how you figured out what your skill was that people wanted to pay for.
For sure. So it's funny because when I was going through my program, we were required to take a number of business related classes. And so for people not familiar, international development is very much like we do an 8-month placement in a developing country. very much focused on like not for profit work and that sort of thing. And so when we were in school, we're like, why do we have to take all these business classes? Like, this is ridiculous. I don't even like economics. And now I'm like, oh, thank someone that this was what we had to do, because there are certain things like bookkeeping and all of that that have been made a lot easier because I had to go through that. So in terms of like when I entered school and what I thought my career trajectory was going to look like, I wouldn't really say there's too much of an overlap. But in terms of my own personal long-term goals, I definitely see it sort of weaving its way back in down the road.
That's awesome. Okay, I've got a couple other questions here. What if someone's really stuck and just don't know, that just have with motivation, don't know which direction to go to or what they want to do? Where does somebody find inspiration and motivation and ideas?
For sure. So, in terms of practical exercises, I can think of one that I do with a lot of my clients when we first start working together. And it's sort of this idea of goal mapping, but it requires you to really just sort of let everything out of your brain, basically. So essentially, you get a timer. You can use your phone, set it for 5 minutes. And then you make 4 categories. So one is like things I want to do in the next 3 to 6 months, things I want to do in the next year, things I want to do in the next 5 years, and then what do I want to do in my lifetime? And then you start the timer and you literally write down anything that comes to mind. Even if it comes to your brain and you're like, that's kind of a weird idea, write it down anyway. Who cares? No one's going to read this list except you. And sort of just let that energy sort of flow out of you and brain dump all of your ideas. I promise you, you'll be amazed at what comes to mind. Sometimes I'm like, where did that idea even come from? I don't really know. And then from there, what I get them to do is they have these 4 lists that they've created. They reset the timer for just 1 minute, and then they really start to think about which one of these things from each list, so you're going to end up picking 4 in total, is going to have the most significant impact in terms of whatever my longer goal is for my life, in terms of the emotions I want to elicit for the long-term scheme of things. What is that one thing from 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, a lifetime that's going to be most significant in helping me to achieve that? And obviously, if it's like a 3 to 6 month goal and you pick that one and then you are able to achieve it, you can always come back to this list and pick another one. But from there, once you have your 4 goals, you take those, and like I've talked about many times today, you take it and you break it down step by step. What are all the components that I need to do, being as specific as possible, down to like things you need to research, books you need to read, people you need to call, whatever that looks like for your specific task, and then sort of letting that guide you. So I don't know if that exercise is helpful, but that's one that I've seen a lot of my clients have a lot of success with. So I would recommend. 10 out of 10.
Yeah, to me that sounds interesting. I think one of the challenge with a subject like this is that everybody really responds to different things, right? Like for some people, X might be a very motivating thing. For some people, Y is the only way they hear and interpret things. So it's great to hear ideas like that. I like that one. So here's another question. I felt like I was on the right track, but it feels like the pandemic has thrown all of my plans and my progress right out the window. How can someone adapt to the kinds of processes that you're talking about in these kinds of times with this circumstance right now?
For sure. So thinking about where maybe like 3 months ago, where you had thought you were going to be now versus where you actually are now, and really reflecting so that you can sort of refocus and recenter your priorities. Because I think that what happens is we often have this image in our minds of like, in 3 months, I'm going to be X. And we get so fixated on the how of how that's all going to work out that when a wrench gets thrown in our plans, like COVID-19, it can be very challenging for us to realize, like, okay, we're not actually in control of everything like we would like to think we are. And so, where would I rather get to versus where I am right now? And really just affording yourself the opportunity to experiment. Like I sort of briefly mentioned, I like to treat my entire life as an experiment. And so I am 100% a fan of iteration. I will try a million ideas and fail if I have to in order to figure out what it is that's going to work. And so I sort of have viewed this pandemic as an opportunity itself to try and get creative and to try and brainstorm ways that I can try things that maybe I haven't tried before. So I recently bought a house in January, and we had converted a portion of it into an actual yoga studio. So I was going to be opening a physical yoga studio in addition to the mobile services that I offer. And basically, I was supposed to take my first private client right around March 17th, I think, which was essentially right when the province announced the state of emergency. And so,
yes, it was.
Yeah, we weren't allowed to have anyone over. So I kind of had to rework my plans. And I think that that's just a really good example. So I'm actually launching a 30-day virtual yoga studio starting on Saturday. So I'll be doing live yoga classes every day for 30 days. And that was sort of my own rebound from, okay, I have this plan of having a yoga studio and now I can't have that. So how am I going to adapt and iterate and sort of make the best of the situation? And so obviously I assume that that might not be your specific circumstance, but hopefully that just goes to show that there are opportunities here. You just kind of have to get resourceful, get creative, and ask other people. I actually didn't even come up with that idea on my own. I had people in my network that suggested it, and I sort of took it and ran with it. So not being afraid to ask other people for input if there's something that you're particularly stuck on is definitely helpful.
Great. Yeah, I think it really all comes down to how to make this situation an opportunity in the things that you're doing.
So for sure, and remembering that we're all experiencing the same thing. While we may not have the same circumstances, we can definitely relate to the challenges that are presented. So I think people are more willing than perhaps before to give feedback and share ideas. So not being afraid to say like, hey, I'm really struggling. Can someone offer me some advice?
That's really true. I mean, I think one of the things that I've noticed during this period is that it feels like there's a better sense of community happening
Absolutely.
than I've ever felt in my life. Just a mutual support available just by asking for it, you know?
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. So I want to circle back a little bit. You talked about your podcasts. How did you teach yourself to podcast? Because podcasting is very different than any other medium. And some things work well, some things don't work well. Like, what resources did you use to become an expert at that?
Yeah, so it's actually funny. Like I had mentioned before, when my friend and I started our podcast, it might have been 2014 or 2015. We had no idea what it took to have a podcast. So we literally got together one day, recorded an episode, and we're like, oh, we're starting a podcast. Little did we know there's all this like back end stuff you have to do to get it published. So through that experience, I learned that it's actually really not that complicated once you know how to do it. But there are really no rules. And I think that's what the great thing is about podcasting is as long as you have, like I started with literally a pair of headphones and my laptop, most computers, I have a Mac, so it has like GarageBand built into it, but you can download Audacity online for free. Like basically you just sit down and you talk. I always like to have an outline. That's just my personality, but I know there are podcasters out there that just kind of free form talk about whatever comes to their head. So there are tons of resources available on YouTube. If you go on Google and literally type in how to start a podcast, you'll find a plethora of resources. I also have a free sort of like mini course that I put together. So I don't know if there's going to be a way for me to share that with people after this, if they want to check that out. And it basically walks you through like the technical side of starting a podcast and where you can host it and stuff like that. So if that would be helpful, I can share that with people as well.
Awesome. Okay, what are your favorite podcasts?
Good question. I listen to a lot of like business related ones. I like Dave Ramsey, his Money Talk podcast. Stacy Tuschl, who's an entrepreneur, she has a podcast called Foot Traffic. And then for fun, I'll listen to like Ear Hustle, which is recorded inside a prison in the United States. That's just like a fun little aside. Very, very
That's
interesting.
Random.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Can you tell me, were you already a yoga instructor when you decided to start your own business?
No. So that's kind of the funny part about the whole thing was I used to take yoga classes. It's actually really funny because about, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago now, I actually hated yoga. I was like, this is awful. It gives me back pain. I would never do this. And then I started seeing a bunch of people in my circle going on these exotic like yoga teacher trainings. And I was like, oh, that looks so fun. I would love to do that. And then I started taking yoga recreationally multiple times a week. And I sort of just fell in love with it. And then literally had this idea of like, I'm going to open a mobile yoga studio. I ended up on my 26th birthday, I was on a bus with my boyfriend. We were on a brewery tour. And I was like, I'm going to just book this training in Portugal right now, booked my flights, went into work that Monday and was like, all right, I'm leaving in a month. So here's my resignation. And it all just kind of snowballed from there. So I lined up a part-time job when I got back from my training so that I could sort of launch my business and still bring in a little bit of money. And then thankfully it kind of all just panned out from there. Obviously it wasn't necessarily a very smooth journey, but we made it through and here we are 2 years later and I wouldn't change a thing. So yeah,
that's amazing.
Long way to answer a question, but no, I was not a yoga teacher when I left my 9-to-5 job. So.
I love that story. I love that story.
Take a chance on yourself. That's all you can do.
You talk a little bit about your mobile yoga studio. Can you explain that? What does that mean? I'm picturing, so I'm a kid of the 70s. So there was this thing when I was little called bookmobile. It was like a library in a bus that would come to different parts of the neighborhood. So I'm picturing something like that for your mobile yoga studio, although that might not be what you have.
I love that. Just as an aside, I became a DZ truck driver in the fall for the fire department, and somebody joked that I should buy a transport truck and convert it into a yoga studio and drive it around to people's houses. But no, essentially what it means is I have bins full of like all the supplies, blocks, bolsters, mats, blankets, and I will drive to people at their location and we do yoga. So where they're at. So sometimes it's cottages, sometimes it's in their homes, sometimes it's on their front lawn. It really just depends. So I have a number of one-on-one clients that I work with throughout the year, but obviously Muskoka is a very seasonal area. So in the summer, I see a lot of larger groups, bachelorette parties, family reunions, that kind of thing. And essentially it's just the convenience of rather than them having to go to a yoga studio, they have me come to them with all of the supplies that they need.
That's pretty cool. What does your average day look like, Danielle?
Right now, pretty much the same, but pre-pandemic, it was a lot of, I do a lot of desk work actually, which a lot of people wouldn't assume, but with the online membership program that I run and my coaching clients, I do a lot of like filming and creating video content for them, recording different guided meditations and stuff like that. We do monthly coaching calls. So we all hop on Zoom and sort of share where we're at and what we're working on. And then I would break my week up with, again, private one-on-one clients throughout Muskoka. So I'd be driving around to different people's houses and sharing practice with them there. So obviously I'm not doing that now. And I've just been doing live yoga online once a week. And then moving into May, I'll be doing yoga every day for 30 days. So combining that with the desk work kind of tries to make things stay interesting, and every day is kind of different. So it really just depends on what my creative project is for the week and getting that done. So sometimes it's also sitting down and podcasting. I like to time block, so I will do an entire day where I just write and record all of my podcasts and get them done for the whole month, the whole following month, because I find that to be most effective, most efficient in terms of productivity. So that's just how I prefer to do it, but it might not necessarily work for everyone.
Cool. I think it's kind of fascinating that you mentioned that you're a volunteer firefighter in your spare time. Talk to me a little bit about how being a volunteer firefighter connects with the yoga studio.
Yeah, so I joined the fire department in 2017. So it was when I was still at my 9-to-5 job, and they were actually super supportive in me transitioning into my current role. But it's been funny because there is this huge movement in the realm of first responders for PTSD and addressing PTSD, and yoga has been a huge catalyst in that movement. And so I was scheduled to go to Montreal in March for hands-on training, but I now have to do it virtually. So it'll be taking place in a couple of weeks, but essentially it's all about using yoga as a means of treating and healing trauma. And so it's been very interesting for me because obviously when I decided to open a yoga studio, I didn't really have in mind that it would in any way really complement my role as a firefighter. But it's been very unique and fun to be able to sort of meld the two together. So I've been offering yoga to the department now for almost 2 years since I started the business. Basically, I sat down with the chief and we decided that it would be a great program to run in-house. And so we kind of started there, and I'm excited to see what opportunities that sort of brings as things go back to normal and I take that training. And it's just like a whole area I didn't even really know existed until.
I didn't either, but I find that fascinating and logical, but fascinating at the same time. So yoga as a support and treatment for PTSD.
Yeah. So another book recommendation, if anyone's taking notes, The Body Keeps Score. Very great read on how our actual brain composition changes as a result of trauma, and different techniques for releasing that and sort of adapting to the new normal, I guess. Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but it's very, very interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think in some respects, this experience for some people has been traumatic.
Absolutely.
It's of isolation, even though, there's not like a physical threat in many cases, but still some people are experiencing this as traumatic. Mm-hmm. So yoga could help with that.
For sure. And that's sort of been a big sort of motivation, I guess, for this 30 days of yoga that I'm doing, is to really afford people the opportunity to practice some self-care and really just take 10 minutes to an hour. The classes change every day, to really check in with themselves and see like, hey, what's going on? Because I think with the chaos of everything that's happening, it can be really easy to like bury ourselves in work or bury ourselves in having to look after the children or whatever it is in your particular circumstance.
Netflix.
So, yeah, Netflix, watching 10 hours of Netflix, just affording yourself the opportunity to ask like, okay, but how am I actually doing? Because I think we can try to distract ourselves and not really necessarily always address what's going on at a deeper level. So
I think
I'll take this whole presentation into like a talk about trauma, but just a word of the wise is to check in and see like, how am I doing today?
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. Did you know that the mobile yoga concept would be profitable in the Muskoka area? Did you have to do any in-depth research or market analysis before you did that, or did you just jump out there?
So when I was in my 9 to 5 job, the community that I live in was running a Win This Space competition where you could put forth a business idea and they were going to offer free rent for a year in a downtown location. And so I had entered that with the idea of opening like an actual yoga studio. Um, and I made it into the top 3 finalists. We did like a whole presentation in front of a panel, and I obviously wasn't selected. But in that process, I had gone through the work of creating a business plan and figuring out logistically how that would all work. And so a little bit yes and a little bit no. Obviously, with taking things mobile as opposed to having an actual studio, that cut a lot of my overhead costs. And so my thought was kind of, I'm going to give this a try. If it doesn't work out, I have experience in the corporate world. So if I had to go find another 9 to 5 job, I likely could. But I couldn't really live with myself 40 years down the road being like, well, what would have happened if you had just tried that thing? And so I decided to sort of just jump in and take advantage of the one life that I had. I don't have kids, so I think that was probably pretty big in making the decision a lot easier. But yeah, it's kind of just, I've always been of the mentality that I can't really live to appease the other people in my life. If I'm not happy, then what's the point? So I sort of did a little bit of research, kind of knew what the market was like, but decided to just go for it and see where it took me. So here we are.
Here we are. Can you tell us a little bit about what your future plans are for your business, Danielle?
Absolutely. So definitely transitioning more into the PTSD first responders type of stuff. So there's talks within our department of figuring out ways we can sort of move that to other departments in the area. And then ideally long term, I would like to focus more on the retreat side of the business too. That's been super successful, and I get a lot of really great feedback. I've hosted 3 retreats now since I opened my business. And I've been able to witness a lot of incredible transformation in a short period of time with the clients that come to those. And so maybe long term opening a retreat facility, but we'll see what happens in the meantime, I guess.
One other question. What kind of requirements are there for to meet in order to have the title of life coach?
Sure. So there is, it's funny because the coaching industry itself isn't really heavily regulated. So there are a lot of coaches out there with no certification that just call themselves a coach because there's no sort of governing body to tell them that they can't do that. I did a comprehensive program that I went through. It was online. So I have a certification as a transformational life coach that's accredited. But it really just depends on the individual. Like I said, I know a lot of coaches who are monetarily very successful that don't have any certification at all, but really it just depends on whether or not the client is looking for that.
Cool. You mentioned a yoga program that you took in Portugal. Can you tell us the name of that program?
Yeah, it's Bend It Like Buddha. So, and it's located in the Algarve. So I don't remember the actual city, but very, very
in beautiful. The Algarve, nice.
Yeah, I'd never been to Portugal, so it was funny. I guess basically I had planned a vacation at the beginning of June, and I had tickets to see Wicked in Toronto at the end of June. So I was like, I need something that's only 20 days long, and then I opened up the internet, and there it was. So it was just like happened to be right place, right time, and that's how I ended up there. But
was it everything you hoped it would be?
Portugal. Sorry?
Was it everything you hoped it would be?
Oh, absolutely. And like the people that I met there completely transformed the trajectory of my life. Absolutely.
Nice. What resources can you talk about that could be used to develop a business plan for a passion?
Sure. Again, let me look at my bookshelf. I have this one here. Now, I didn't use this when I was building my business. A friend just gave this to me recently. and I'm only about halfway through, but it's called The Personal MBA. So if you're not someone who actually has an MBA, it's about mastering the art of business. So it gives you sort of like the Cliff Notes version of what it requires to create a business. Another great one is become your own boss in 12 months. So this also like step by step breaks down if you have not even had the thought yet in your brain of what your business is going to be, this is a really good beginner based book on getting started. And then if you're into more of like the woo woo kind of thing, then I would recommend You Are a Badass at Making Money. But I could sit here all day and show you all the books I've read. But
your bookshelf is really cool. I like the you referenced a book called The $100 Startup.
Mm-hmm.
Did that sort of help take you from step one to execution?
Yeah. So he does a really good. He gives a lot of really good examples for both people that want to start like a full-fledged business and people who are just looking to have something that they can run on the side. And I think that's really what drew me to this book, because at the time I was sort of exploring like, okay, well, what can I do on the side with this podcast that will still allow me to work my 9-to-5 job? But then I kind of just reached a point where I was like, you know what? I'm just going all in. But some people don't necessarily want to do that. So this is definitely, this would probably be my number one recommendation.
That's fantastic. Danielle, I want to thank you so much for being so open and sharing all of your ideas and your personal experience with us. It's been great to hear all those tips. And I know that there's a couple of things that I've taken away that I'm excited to do. One in particular, the timed exercise for different goals. I like that. So thank you. Thank you very much for your time and energy. It's been great.
Yeah, that's excellent. And if anyone has any additional questions, you can always reach out to me on any of my social media platforms. I'm pretty active there. Like if later on down the road, you're like, oh, I wonder if Danielle knows the answer to this. I'm more than happy to help in that way too.
Thank you for your generosity.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
You're so welcome. So I'm looking forward to connecting again on Tuesday, May the 5th, when we have our third and final episode in this series of Isolate to the Fullest, where we're going to welcome Kunal Gupta. He's a Waterloo alumnus, and his presentation is going to be focused on simple but powerful practices to help us develop our strengths in ourselves while we're isolated. So thanks once again for tuning in. I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and namaste.